Welcome back, guys, to a special episode on the channel. We're going to I think, make a bit of a series of this. Some might be F1 Worldwide episodes and some might just be collaborations. But I'm very happy to welcome back onto the channel for the first time. Second time. Because he did an F1 Worldwide where we spoke about Renault and their future. And that is Amadi from Kids Love F1. So, Amadi, welcome back.
Hello, Mike. It's very excited to be on this F1 Worldwide podcast for a second time.
No problem at all. And so, what we're going to talk about today is, well, I think the best season of the past decade. It was just an absolute brilliant season. There was plenty of intrigue and superb racing throughout. And obviously a title fight that went right down to the last race. So that always makes it an interesting season. And that is, of course, the 2012 season. So there is only really one place to start with this one. And it is going to be the first 7 races where we had 7 different winners. So, Amadi, what were your thoughts? I know you've recently just watched through the whole season on F1 TV. What were your thoughts on it?
I mean, after, watching this 2019 season with Mercedes winning almost everything, and even in the last few years, I mean, it is just absolutely crazy to have 7 different winners in the first 7 races. And, I mean, you said that 2012 was the best season of the decade. I'd go as far to say that it was the best season of all time. Definitely top 3, and I think it could make a good case for being the best season out of them all. But yeah, the first 7 different winners in the first 7 races, I mean, it's something absolutely crazy, something we've really never seen since.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and bold claim going one of the best seasons all time, but it is a hell of a season. And if you haven't watched this season, with F1 TV still free, go and watch it. It's a hell of a season to watch and relive from there. But those first 7 races with 7 different winners, it started off so well for McLaren. Obviously, front row lockout in the first Grand Prix, and Button would go on and win that first Grand Prix and obviously take the lead in the championship. But it then was a bit of a iffy path for McLaren after that, and in the second, and Ferrari was so poor in that race that then the second race of the season was Malaysia in the rain. That was a really great race actually, and Sergio Perez's first ever podium in F1, scoring second, and was so close, might have even won that race.
On pace, he really should have won that race. I mean, looking at it, I mean, I already obviously knew the result when I was rewatching it, that Alonso won. But I mean, I was like, how did Perez not win this? Even despite Sauber screwing up the strategy, he was still on pace to pass Alonso. And then he obviously went off the track. But even then, he only finished 2 seconds past Alonso. He clearly had more pace. He really should have won that race. But, quite unfortunate he didn't. But nonetheless, a great performance from Perez.
Yeah, he was so quick that day. And, if ever you want to think, well, this season actually earned Perez a call up to McLaren in the vacant seat that Lewis Hamilton left. But, he finished on the podium, I believe, 3 times this season, which was mightily impressive, considering, he wasn't from one of the top 3 teams. But it was a hell of a drive, and it was a shame. I think I remember he was on F1 Live on their Instagram recently with Will Buxton, and that's obviously one of the incidents that they asked about and spoke about, and it was just, apparently he just went a fraction little wide onto the white line, and it just threw him, and he just lost all his grip. But it was such a shame for the young Mexican, because that would have been an immense win if he managed to get that one under his belt.
Yeah, but overall, for him, still really quite an impressive season overall. Even across the season, other than Malaysia, he was just really consistent, and a lot of the times, he was even up there fighting with the top guys like we saw in Malaysia. So he definitely deserved that call up to McLaren, but obviously, definitely wasn't a great move. McLaren went down after that, but yeah, Perez, 2012 probably has to be his best season. I don't think he's really had as great of a season since.
I'd probably agree. That's probably the best car he's had. Well, other than as we would affectionately call it, the pink Mercedes, was potentially going to be, it was going to be probably a great season this season. I mean, it still might be when things get kicked off, and with the chassis staying the same for 2021, it could be a really interesting couple of years for Sergio Perez in a car that, has decent pace within it. But we'll move on to Malaysia, and obviously Mercedes' first win since the 1955 Italian Grand Prix, which was won by Fangio. Nico Rosberg, I think a lot of people probably assumed that when it came back in 2010 that Michael Schumacher would be the one who would secure the first win for the team. But Nico he'd quietly gone about his business, and it was a fantastic drive by Nico in China.
It really was. Mercedes were just very, very quick on that weekend. There's, I guess, some sort of development that they made to the car that allowed them, to have that sort of pace, wasn't it? I think it was a front row lockout for them, or Schumacher was like second or third. I can't quite remember, but yeah, it was a really great drive from Rosberg. But yeah, I really would have loved to see Schumacher at least fighting for the wins. He definitely, was past his best in 2012, but he definitely did have his fair share of bad luck. Like I remember in that race, he had the pit stop problem. That's why he had to retire. But at least Rosberg got his first win. Up until then, his career had been, I guess, moderately successful. But then, he got his first win with Mercedes, kept that momentum up, and, the rest is history.
Yeah, it certainly was he was certainly building that team around him, and he was basically the main guy. And that technical innovation, you thought it was a double DRS, something on the rear wing that just worked an absolute dream at China. And unfortunately, this was probably the peak for Mercedes. 3 races in, that's not a good one to kind of reflect on. But it was an interesting one. But a great win by Nico. I think that was anything there, and it certainly was a kind of forecast for things to come. He would have a lot of great performances for Mercedes in obviously the following years. But Bahrain was an interesting one, because there was a load of political stuff around Bahrain as well, because obviously you had all the protests and everything, and whether F1 should race there. It ended up with F1 actually racing there, and Red Bull obviously had been completely dominant in 2011 and they struggled, but Sebastian Vettel gets his first win of the season here.
Yeah, like you said, up until that point, Vettel had really been kind of absent. What a contrast from his 2011 season where he just couldn't stop winning. But yeah, in those first 3 races, I think in Australia he was second. That's decent. Malaysia, I'm pretty sure he had that collision with Carter Kane. That was funny when he called him a cucumber, but yeah, like the first few races for him, it definitely wasn't too impressive. Sharp contrast from 2012, but at least he finally managed to get it together. Obviously, holding off the pressure from Kimi Räikkönen, and yeah, at least he could finally get that first win on the board. And up until then, what was quite a disappointing season for Vettel.
Yeah, and you mentioned it there in terms of the surprise packages probably from this race was the pace that Lotus had. And, as they were serious contenders for fighting at the top as well. Obviously mentioned Sauber with Sergio Perez kind of doing well throughout the season. But, Kimi Räikkönen was probably quicker than Vettel that day, and Vettel was able to hold him off. Kimi was a little bit more he was happy to get the podium, I think, for Lotus. He didn't want to kind of risk it all and kind of maybe crash out with Vettel in the position. He was happy with second, and it was a double podium for Lotus because obviously Romain Grosjean finished third in that race as well.
Yeah, Lotus had a lot of pace that year. I think, they definitely had the pace to win quite a few more races than only, I think, the one that they won in Abu Dhabi. I remember them struggling a lot in qualifying. Like in some of the races, they would just really come to the field, carve through the field, but it just was never enough for a win, except for that one single race in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, it was they couldn't quite get the complete package together, could they? But it was still a really impressive return, I think, for Kimi Räikkönen. And obviously, we know this is such a mixed season for Grosjean. I think I was watching their season review back thing, and DC, I think, for me, sums it up perfectly. You have kind of good racing drivers, and you have quick racing drivers, and Grosjean was a quick racing driver. His pace was undeniable, but the amount of incidents he got involved in this season, of course, with we'll get onto it, the Spa one where he received that race ban, he really hadn't mastered the racecraft by that point. But the next one up, so our kind of fifth winner of the season, which it was just an immense start, was, well, this was pretty much a sum up of everything that could go wrong went wrong for Lewis Hamilton in this season, because we'll talk about it, but McLaren really, obviously this season's renowned for the title battle between Fernando and Sebastian Vettel, but McLaren really should have been in the constructor and the kind of driver title fight if they'd kind of put everything together. But Lewis Hamilton had pole position but lost it because he wasn't able to get back to the pits, which meant that Pastor Maldonado started at the front of the grid for Williams, and he would go on and win that race, having the pace to beat Alonso after he lost the position at the start but overtook him in the first round of pit stops. It was probably Pastor's finest moment in F1.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like, how he had the pace to keep Alonso behind, I have no clue. I mean, in every other race, he just couldn't stop causing incidents, couldn't stop crashing. But I mean, that race, he was just on another level. Like, I just really don't know how he won.
It was an immense drive, but it all kind of seemed to piece together, and yeah, it was amazing to kind of see. Obviously, I think there's images of Frank Williams after that race being rather emotional, because it now transpires. We don't know what the future holds, but that might be Williams' last ever Grand Prix win. And who would have thought, with the drivers that drove for them, that it would be Pastor Maldonado who did it? But I think the quote from DC about quick racing drivers and good racing drivers probably applies to Pastor Maldonado. His pace was undeniable, and when he got it right, like he did in Spain, he could fight with the best of them at the top. But like you said, with the other incidents throughout the season, it was kind of such a mixed season for Pastor.
Oh yeah, definitely was. And to add on to your point about Hamilton, he in that season he actually drove really well, and I think that McLaren definitely had a title-winning car that season. They should have been in the hunt for the championship, and it's not really that Hamilton drove badly. I think it was just him being hard done by all of the reliability, retiring out of the lead in 3 occasions in Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Brazil, and obviously all of the messed up pit stops. So yeah, it really detracted from his championship challenge.
Yeah, and it was such a shame for Lewis, because, well, it was the final nail in the coffin, and there were moments of, not great moments on Lewis's personal character throughout the season, but it just seemed like the relationship had come to its natural end, and this was one of the points that probably helped contribute to his decision that he would eventually join his friend Nico Rosberg at Mercedes team. But with that Spanish Grand Prix, it also, after the race, going from the great elations of Williams winning, their pit box set alight. Do you remember that? Did you see the videos of it after on the race? That was crazy but it was nice how the whole paddock came together, wasn't it?
What a sharp contrast, from the high of the winning to, having that fire. Quite a tragic accident. But I mean, yeah, I guess just adds to the craziness of the season in general.
It certainly does. I think it added to the kind of craziness of just that start to the season. We'd already had our 5th different race winner, and now their pit box had kind of gone up in flames. It was mental. But the last point on that Spanish Grand Prix was obviously the collision that Michael Schumacher had with Bruno Senna that would then influence the next race, which was in Monaco, where Michael Schumacher showed one last moment of brilliance to take the pole lap at Monaco, but obviously wouldn't start from pole with the penalty that he received for that collision with Bruno Senna. But yeah, it was a special pole lap, wasn't it?
Oh, like I was, I was really young at the time when I was watching 2012. I was like 6 or 7, so I have a few memories of it. But that is one of the main things. I knew how good Schumacher was, and that it was his final season and everything. And I really felt bad because that lap was just astonishing. Just one of the few glimpses of the old Schumacher that we saw in his comeback. And I mean, the fact that he had that 5 place grid penalty, I mean, was just so unfortunate. And it was Monaco, so he definitely could have won that race even if he didn't have the fastest car. But yeah, it was a really great pole lap, and one of the things as a young kid I do really remember in that season.
Yeah, I think it always for me stands out as a memory of that season, because you just go, wow, because that Mercedes, like we said, the high point was in China with Nico Rosberg taking that win. It wasn't really competitive after that. Probably you could say the kind of 4th, 5th quickest car on the grid after that. And for him to put that one on pole, and Monaco, you don't kind of fluke a pole position. It's an immense lap if you can kind of get yourself on pole at Monaco. And that was just such an immense lap from Michael. But he did get that 5-place grid penalty, and the guy who would then start in first place was Mark Webber. And he would go on and pretty much dominate that race, didn't he? Being the 6th winner of the season so far.
Yeah, I mean, up until that point, Webber had, quite a troubled, I guess, championship challenge. But, somehow, if you just pick up the points, as we see later with Alonso, then you can just stay in a crazy championship fight like this when there's, just so much variability in who wins. And obviously, Webber took advantage of that in this race. And yeah, he managed to pick up that race win in Monaco. He came, I guess, he was pretty much in the entire season there or thereabouts, but obviously at the end his title challenge sort of fell off at the end.
Yeah, I mean, probably the biggest surprise in this first part of it is, like you said, Webber had an indifferent season. Yes, Vettel had claimed, first position in Bahrain. But, Red Bull had dominated the season before in 2011. Like, it was an immense effort from Seb. But the car wasn't quite there. The Red Bull for the first part of this season really wasn't. The best car, certainly in the first part of this season, was the McLaren. But they weren't really taking advantage of that advantage that they possessed at the time. But it was obviously the 2nd successive win for Mark Webber at Monaco. He'd won it. It was 2nd successive, or was it 2010 that he won in Monaco? I can't remember. But yes, it was the 3rd win in a row for Red Bull there, and Mark Webber had won 2 of them. And yeah, it certainly kind of changed a little bit. I think Red Bull started to get a little bit of their mojo back, and Mark Webber, like you said, being consistent point scoring throughout the season, it was important for him to get this win.
Oh yeah, it definitely was. I think Red Bull, certainly with Sebastian Vettel, who we're going to talk about later, obviously, they struggled quite a lot at the start of the season, but obviously they developed the car quite a lot, and you could see the difference, especially with Vettel in the second half of the season. I mean, he looked like a completely different driver, which obviously we're going to get to. At the start, he was, pretty much, I guess Webber was pretty close to him or even matching him on some occasions. But then after that, Vettel, he was just off like he normally is when he is, like comfortable and, in tune with the car.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll move on to Silverstone. And, won't move on to Silverstone, we'll move on to Canada. And Canada, a bit like Michael Schumacher kind of made it his home in Montreal. Lewis Hamilton was in the process of making Canada his home. He's won, is it a total of 6 or 7 times now he's won there in total. He is really immense round, the Montreal circuit. And
yeah, I remember watching that race quite well. I mean, Hamilton, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was, Alonso and Vettel who wanted to go onto the one-stop strategy. And it was Hamilton who went onto the 2-stop strategy. And, the way how he cut through the field, Hamilton just had a really good pace advantage, in that race over them. And, Vettel and Alonso, they were pretty helpless on that one-stop strategy. And I think that shows two things. Hamilton's racecraft was definitely beginning to develop into what it is today, to the, unbeatable, errorless driver that he is today. Obviously, he was plagued by all those reliability issues. And I also think that those Pirelli tires, I think it's something that Formula One should consider going back to, because I think that, in today's Formula One, I think the one stop is just killing the action, because, in a way going slower is faster, because, if you're on a two-stop strategy, it's just not worth the extra 20-second pit stop. But in those days with those tires, that fell off the cliff, it definitely, like, doing a one-stop or two-stop sometimes, it was risky. Like, there was more of an incentive to use the more aggressive strategy. I think that is also one thing that influenced the action in 2012.
Yeah, it's difficult, because you try and manipulate the tyres as much as possible, and it becomes difficult. But then the Formula One teams are just supremely smart, and just over time, whatever Pirelli have got, and they've just optimised the strategy to it so that the tyres don't really become too much of an issue, other than, in certain races like Hungary last year, where Hamilton had a free pit stop, so therefore when Verstappen's tyres were basically off a cliff at the end, Lewis was able to catch him easy with the kind of fresher tyres. But, Lewis, that racecraft was important that he kind of developed there, and Vettel and Alonso suffered massively for going on the wrong pit strategy, and again allowed Romain Grosjean to come onto the podium for Lotus, and Sergio Perez claimed another podium as well in that race. So that's also one of the big kind of positives and the big draws for this 2012 season, is you weren't getting the same faces week in, week out on the podium, were you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what was so unique about 2012, which is, how many different people were on the, were just on the podium and getting those good results and wins. One thing that I did notice is that, the midfield, the gap between the midfield and the top teams was much, much smaller. Like, obviously there was Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, the top teams, and we had Lotus, I guess. They were, sort of in between, but then we had Williams, Force India, Sauber, that were even coming there for the occasional podium and win. So they were just, half the grid, honestly, like, had a chance at having a good result. And, you could have as a top driver, you could have a problem-free race, but then still finish in 8th, like somewhere down in 8th. That was what was so special about this season.
Yeah. It was absolutely immense. And, we'll move on to then the first two-time winner in the season, and probably his best race of the entirety of the season. And that was the Valencia Grand Prix, the European Grand Prix held at Valencia. And Fernando Alonso obviously won that race. Sebastian Vettel looked dominant that weekend, in fairness. But they suffered an alternator issue which forced him to retire, and Fernando to kind of inherit the lead from that. But Fernando 11th to 1st in the end. It was still a mightily impressive race around, obviously, the streets of Valencia.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Alonso, I think that 2012 was probably his best ever season, like, at least in my opinion. And, up until this point in the first half of the season, he wasn't necessarily winning a lot of races, but he was just always there. Like I said before, in such a crazy season, all you need to do is pick up the points, and that's exactly what Alonso did. Then, obviously, his amazing drive from 11th to 1st took advantage of Vettel's really bad luck, and he managed to get that win at his home race. I remember it was definitely one of the most special wins of his career.
Definitely, and I think it would be one of his kind of most special moments as well. And for me, I always remember the podium. It was, an aspiring Ferrari world champion. Obviously, it never transpired that way, with two former Ferrari world champions in Kimi Räikkönen and Michael Schumacher. And that was a pretty great podium, I think, on that day. But it was nice. I know street circuits have their ways, and Valencia kind of saw the wayside. But I thought it was a pretty good circuit, and it was certainly a fantastic race during the season.
It's weird. Valencia, like I actually, a lot of people talk about it as a really bad track, but it actually looks like a decent track, and the spectacle, the weather was just amazing. But 2012 was actually the only decent race that it had. The other races were just absolute snooze fests, like outside of 2012. And also, I guess we can talk about Vettel's atrocious luck. I mean, a lot of people that say that Vettel has been really lucky in his career and should have won by a huge margin in 2010 and 2012. I point to races like these where obviously Alonso had his own bad luck with the first lap incidents getting Grosjean'd, but Vettel, he definitely had a lot of reliability issues. I believe it was an ongoing alternator problem that cost him the race win in Valencia and cost him a lot of points in Italy. So if it wasn't for that reliability, could have been very different for him.
Oh, absolutely. It was, Vettel certainly earned his way to this title, and we will come to that. We'll talk about, obviously that you can't talk about 2012 without that title battle between himself and Alonso and how kind of immense that was. But you then have Silverstone, Germany, Hungary, Belgium, Italy before the kind of Asia rounds, and that. Although Alonso kind of got a win, where did he get it? He got the win in Germany, and Mark obviously won in Silverstone. He had a great race with Fernando. I remember it was the combination with Mark went onto the hard compound and Alonso went onto the softer one, and the softer one didn't hold up for Alonso to the end of the race. Another kind of poor tyre call by Ferrari. And meant that Webber was able to take the victory. But it was a great battle between those two at that race. But it was a point where McLaren seemed to maybe be getting it together, because obviously Lewis won a couple of races in that time, and Jenson Button obviously won Spa at the incident that Grosjean got banned for.
Yeah, that was again, the European season was obviously quite interesting. We saw Alonso having quite a good run, extending his championship lead. Like you said, McLaren were, sort of starting to get it together, and, it was quite a tough stretch for Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull. But yeah, I mean, that first lap incident in Belgium, it was quite a, just an incident that we really haven't seen in a long time, I guess, other than the 2019 Belgium Grand Prix, which was quite similar.
And it was a scary incident. We have to be fair. We look at it and we could have quite easily been looking at a fatality in terms of the way that it was Grosjean's car that flew over the top of Fernando's Ferrari, wasn't it? And obviously it took out Perez, Fernando, Hamilton and Grosjean himself, and Kobayashi sustained damage, and I believe Maldonado span in the trouble as well. It was just, it was a really bad incident, and it was deserving of the race ban, and I think it was just because of his repeated incidents throughout the season. Grosjean, suffered for it, and I've spoken about it before. It's almost a career-defining incident for Grosjean, because I don't think many people have forgiven him or given him a real fair shot since then.
Oh yeah, definitely not. Yeah, I mean, Grosjean. I mean, like you said, there's a difference between a good driver and a quick driver. Obviously, Grosjean is a quick driver, but he still does get way too much hate for his incidents. Like every time Grosjean is mentioned, someone brings up his crashes. I mean, he at least he can drive a car. He's a Formula One driver. He made it to Formula One. He's better than 99.99% of the drivers out there. So, I think he definitely like ever since then he wasn't really looked at the same way. After that race ban, it definitely was something really hard to come from. Like a driver being banned from a race. That's just completely unheard of, to be honest. I think it hasn't happened since it happened to Grosjean.
No, it hasn't, and I think that's probably the reason why it defines it. You've only had Mahavir Raghunathan in Formula 2 last year, who racked up enough penalty points to be banned twice. Within that, luckily he never kind of graced the sport of Formula 1. But, with Grosjean, it's an enigma. He had the talent, and it is something that, people have never forgiven him for, and it's a little bit weird. But, yeah, going back to McLaren, we said all through the season they've had the car, and definitely in the first part of the season they had the best car. And, Lewis won in Hungary, he won in Italy, and Button, like we said, won in Belgium. Obviously, he just, was starting to get it together, and that was probably the last kind of high point for Hamilton in the season.
Yeah, I think after his win in Italy, he went up to second in the championship. He even leapfrogged Vettel, who obviously retired from that race. So yeah, Hamilton was getting it together. I think his 2012 season is probably a bit underrated because if he didn't have all of the massive amount of issues that he had, he was more unlucky than Vettel and Alonso combined, at least. Yeah, probably. But yeah, if he didn't have all of those issues, I think he probably would have been a lot closer. He could have been world champion that season. I think he definitely did do quite well. And then, he had that bad luck in Singapore. And yeah, that pretty much, I think then that really just derailed his championship completely.
Absolutely. And, for the kind of loss in fortune for one driver in Lewis Hamilton, and we have to mention up until this point, McLaren had been trying something new. I think Button was talking about it in terms of they were bringing new wheel guns, new jacks, trying new things in the pit stops, and it all just kind of happened too much too soon, or they hadn't really kind of put the plans in place. And yeah, it was awful, the pit stops in McLaren. There were so many mistakes that season. But yeah, obviously the downturn in form was obviously Lewis Hamilton leading the race before having to retire. He claimed pole position, didn't he? He claimed pole in Singapore. But this was the start of where Vettel, for me, this is what wins Sebastian Vettel the 2012 championship. His run in Asia. First in Singapore, Japan, Korea and India. Immense. The Red Bull was better, but it was incredible for Sebastian to capitalise on all four.
Oh yeah, I mean, after his retirement at the Italian Grand Prix, he was 40 points behind Alonso. I mean, that is crazy. I really don't know how he was able to come back from that. Obviously, luck played into his hands a little bit, but then he also had his fair share of bad luck throughout the season. But yeah, I think it was just him, finally getting to grips with that car. There's two different Sebastian Vettels. Sebastian Vettel, who is in one with the car, the Vettel that has all the confidence, who can just get pole, at the start, get out of the DRS range, and he's off. He's already controlled the race, and obviously we saw that Vettel for most of his time at Red Bull. And obviously there's the Vettel who isn't comfortable with the car, makes mistakes, is always spinning, which was what we've been seeing more recently. And yeah, we saw those two Sebastian Vettels in 2012. Obviously the first half of the season he was struggling quite a bit. His teammate was pretty close to him. But yeah, after this he really just threw down the gauntlet, and he won those next four races getting 100 points out of the available 100 points, and that really just swung the momentum of the championship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Red Bull had kind of capitalised it, and hearing him speak about that time, he goes and he says, that type of time, the kind of upgrades and everything that had come into place from Singapore, he could balance the car a little bit how he would like to kind of drive the car. And it was, when he is comfortable in a car, it's with any driver. When a driver has confidence in the machinery that's underneath them, then their performance levels just go through the roof, because they can try things and they just trust that it's going to do what they're going to do. And Vettel certainly had that confidence in the car from there. I was trying to think which it was. It was India was the last and the most dominating performance out of these, where he led every practice session, he qualified on pole, and he led every single lap of the race, and only Jenson Button claiming the fastest lap stopped him from kind of getting the complete set of everything that weekend. It was, he was kind of getting in imperious form by that stage.
Yeah, I mean, like what you said about drivers being so much better when they're comfortable with the car, that is even more so. the case with Sebastian Vettel, who obviously, has a certain driving style that is obviously, suited to cars with, a planted rear, which a lot of people talk about. And yeah, Vettel, when he is on it, he is on it. I don't think that, there is any other driver who could drive those Red Bulls as well as Sebastian Vettel did. I mean, that car was, just made for him, and you could just really see the difference in all of the races. And then, then we had Abu Dhabi. That was also a really good performance from him. Obviously, he had that grid drop that dropped him down to like 24th, I believe, and then he came up. He really cut through the field and avoided all the incidents and safety cars and everything. And he even had to have like an unscheduled pit stop, but he still went from 24th to third. And then Alonso, who finished second, that must have been a really big psychological blow. For like, you expect your rival, like Alonso must have been like, when Vettel was dropped to the last, this is my chance, to claw back all of these lost points. But then, to see Vettel, only one place behind you, you've only gained 3 points on him. That must have been, a really big psychological swing in favor of Vettel.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, yeah, you're right. He started, at the back, had that front wing damage, and then he's had a really kind of good race and point to that start, and then had to go back again and worked his way all the way up until the podium. That showed how much confidence Sebastian Vettel, because, Abu Dhabi is notorious. I know we're kind of big advocates. We actually do quite like the potential of what Abu Dhabi's got. I know a lot of people are kind of anti it, but he made an immense amount of overtakes, kind of working his way through his field to get in third position. And yet, I think it did dishearten Nando kind of in that position, because, yeah, like you said, 3 points only gaining when he's been at the back of the grid. Like, you just go, maybe things aren't going to go my way. And obviously, it was another retirement. It was another retirement for kind of Lewis Hamilton, which meant that Kimi Räikkönen, on his return to Formula One, had won his first race. And it is obviously famous for the "leave me alone, I know what I'm doing" quote that we all love so much from Kimi.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Just such a legend. I mean, he just has, just such a unique personality, I guess. He doesn't try to be funny, but he is one of the most hilarious guys on the grid, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think I see a few people kind of question whether he should have really ever come back to Formula One after his kind of break into rallying. But I think 2012 as a season shows that he should have, because he was still very good that year. Very good. And obviously finished third in the championship in the Lotus, which, is pretty impressive in your first season back.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is. Like, a lot of people were surprised by, just even how on it from the start Kimi Räikkönen was, even after, 2 years out from rallying. So, yeah, it was definitely one of his better seasons in the sport. And, I guess since he came back, like 2012 and 2013 were really good seasons, but then after that, he could just never, I guess it was just never the same after that.
I think he was just consistent, and that goes under the radar. He wasn't spectacular, but he did his job, and especially when he moved to Ferrari, he was always just going to be a number 2 driver, and, they weren't going to ever put their kind of eggs behind him to be a world champion again. So he was just there to kind of collect points and collect podiums, and he did his job efficiently in that time. But 2012 was definitely, probably the peak of the return. He went up, and then after that, there was still some good performances within 2013 with Lotus. But 2014, when he moved back to Ferrari, it was always probably going to be a struggle for him after that.
Yeah, for sure.
But we're coming into the last 2 races, the kind of climax of this, before we kind of talk about some points within the kind of overall season. But the first ever race at COTA, which kind of, it seems a little bit of a mainstay on the Formula One circuit now, the circuit of the Americas. But it was won by Lewis Hamilton here. He was very happy to kind of have that, his last win for McLaren. I think it was a pretty good first outing out for COTA.
Yeah, COTA is I'm pretty sure it's a Tilka track, but yeah, it's just a really, just a well-designed track. Obviously, you have the S's or like that really unique first turn, then the S's, then long straight, then the more technical section, then like that quadruple apex. So yeah, it's really just a well designed circuit. Definitely not one of my favorites, but yeah, it always provides good racing. And yeah, it was F1's first time back in a while since obviously the tire farce at Indianapolis. Um, but yeah, it's a pretty good track. It always provides from some pretty good racing. And let's see, if some other races come in the U.S., which they really want to do. But I doubt any other track, other than maybe Indianapolis, can top COTA.
Yeah, I think it is starting to build its kind of own history, and it has had some great races there. It is a Tilke track, but I think probably where people lose it is there isn't any of its own character. It is almost kind of like a greatest hits of the Tilke circuits, and it just takes little snippets of other circuits and uses them to combine them into a good track. But I don't think that's really an issue. The main thing is do we have good races? Yes. So what that should be enjoyable, and it's what's not to love about that?
Tilke does that with like almost all of his tracks, though. I mean, lots of his tracks will have the S's, the quadruple apexes. I mean, yeah, you can like if you like dissect a lot of his tracks. I think Chain Bear did a video on that. Like if you dissect a lot of his tracks and really analyze them, it really is just like the same group of corners just being used in a different way. It's quite he goes about designing his tracks in quite a unique way, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a lot of people's problems with him, that they feel it's kind of you're driving the same circuit almost. It kind of feels a little bit samey. But yeah, that was a great video by Chain Bear actually, looking into everything on those kind of tracks. But yeah, I like COTA. I'm a fan of it, so I'm not necessarily sure, and it feels nice to kind of look back and remember. But Vettel and Alonso kind of championship leaders. Vettel was leading the race, and Hamilton was able to kind of take advantage. I think Vettel got held up in traffic in that race, and Hamilton was able to kind of make the overtake on that. But it meant that obviously it went down to the last race, and Fernando needed to finish on the podium to have any chance, and I believe he needed kind of Vettel to finish below 7th, so 8th or below.
Yeah, I mean, just it was like, I guess, going into the race, you would just expect, unless something crazy happened, which it did, but unless something crazy happened, going to the race, you'd be thinking that this is just Vettel's. He just has to, get a decent result like 4th or 5th, and the championship is his pretty much.
Yeah, and it turned into a crazy race because obviously that collision with Bruno Senna the contact with Bruno Senna at the start caused him facing the other way. Obviously this was the F1 Rewind recently, so that is on the YouTube channel. So if you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend you go and watch this race, because we recently did with the F1 debate show as well last Monday actually, talking about kind of the best races of the decade, and for what was on the line in this race and the kind of the climax to the end of the season, it was a little bit of an immense race in terms of what it was going from. But yet Vettel had to go from the back and work his way through the field. Alonso had to just kind of work his way into the podium positions, and it was Alonso finished 2nd after Massa kind of let him through to kind of help maximise the points on that place, and Vettel was able to kind of get to 6th when Michael Schumacher let him through on that position, and Vettel became the world champion. And it was an immense kind of fight back. That was a champion. He could have easily given up, but he fought and he desperately wanted that title.
Yeah, like that has to be one of Vettel's, up there with one of Vettel's greatest drives. I mean, I remember that's another memory I have of watching that as a young kid. I mean, the amount of damage to the side of his car. I mean, 9 times out of 10, you go into the pits, retire, your race is over. But I guess it wasn't the case this time, and not only fighting back up to like 6th or 7th with that sort of damage, just being able to handle the pressure of the constantly changing situations. I mean, if people say Vettel can't handle pressure, well, I show them this example. I mean, really was incredible to just carve your way through all of the incidents, all of the changing conditions. It just really was a hectic race, and amazing by him, to just be able to bring it home. And obviously, I mean, what an amazing gesture by Michael Schumacher, passing the torch, here you go, young German friend, my parting gift, good luck for the rest of your career, I guess. But yeah, it was a really special drive and just an amazingly special moment. Like even watching it, back like 8 years later, it is still quite emotional for me as a Vettel fan.
Immense. It was just kind of such a hard fought victory, and yes, he'd been immense in that second half of the season to kind of gain the championship lead, but everything went against him in that race because I remember he had that kind of poor pit stop while switching for slicks, switching for intermediates, wasn't it, which also kind of affected him, but again he came back from that and worked his way up into the position, and yeah, he became a third-time world champion and a worthy third-time world champion in my books. He certainly hadn't had things his own way that season, and this was kind of the top-off performance to be the kind of crowning jewel in what was another great world championship for Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, quite an amazing success for Vettel. Then he followed it up, obviously, but then obviously, if you look at the other side of it, Fernando Alonso and the disappointment, I can't relate because I do not like Fernando Alonso. But yeah, like that was one of the few times where I feel bad for him. And then obviously, there's that iconic picture of him, like at Park Ferme, I believe, just looking ahead. Just you could see his disappointment. It was of someone just who gave their absolute best, but it just still wasn't enough. But one thing that I will say, I really do like to push the narrative of that picture, but it wasn't actually, that wasn't the story behind it. It was actually just Alonso looking at his teammate Massa, who obviously got his first podium at Brazil. That's actually what it was. It wasn't actually, Alonso looking at Vettel celebrating.
No, it wasn't at all. And for me, I think, yeah, we'll talk about. What should we talk? We'll talk about McLaren and the missed opportunity, and then I think we'll finish this kind of chat talking about that kind of title battle between Fernando and Vettel, because it was the peak and the pinnacle for me.
I think before we finish talking about this specific race, I think we also have to touch on Hülkenberg. I mean, who almost won this race. I mean, he should have won, and again, that was something. Watching 8 years later, that is so painful. First of all, he should have won that. Obviously, he went for that move on Hamilton, but then, got, impeded by the back markers, hit Hamilton, and then it was a 10-second stop-go penalty. So first of all, it was heartbreaking to see him not winning that race. But then the fact that they gave him a 10-second stop-go penalty, and then he wasn't on the podium, I mean, in today's F1, with the more lenient stewards, I don't think he would have got that type of penalty.
I don't think he necessarily deserved the penalty. It's a difficult one. This is probably almost career defining for Nico, because it would set the tone in terms of opportunities that kind of just escaped him. And the reason he was behind Lewis Hamilton was he'd had a spin, and Lewis had retaken the lead from Nico, but Nico had the pace that day, and yeah, he certainly had the pace, but he went for a move. Did he need to make it then? No. It's the kind of careers of fine margins, and it's a fine margin between kind of settling for a podium and going for a race win. And Nico Hülkenberg went for the glory, and it just didn't pay off that day. Yeah, like you said, the back marker made things kind of difficult on it, but would the opportunity have come later in the race to overtake Hamilton? I think probably. It was one that obviously ended Lewis Hamilton's McLaren career on a low, and Nico just, it was a sad and kind of disappointing opportunity that he failed to capitalise on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're Nico Hülkenberg at the time, it's like, all right, don't worry. I still have last season. Then obviously maybe he was, expecting that Ferrari contract for 2014, which just never happened. Just like pretty much sums up Nico Hülkenberg's career. Quite a lot of heartbreaks, quite a lot of, what could have been stories.
Absolutely. And I certainly for him, I think if you interview and talk to him, he still looks back at that moment. I think it is defining, and it does feel the biggest opportunity of what might have been for me if I was able to get that win. What opportunities might have come, but unfortunately, careers are full of ifs, buts and maybes, and within his own hands, he didn't quite take that opportunity. And as much as the back marker impeded him, that was Nico Hülkenberg missing the opportunity himself rather than someone taking it away from him, unfortunately. But we'll go with McLaren and then we'll end with the title battle. So McLaren, for me, I think a lot of people don't talk about McLaren when they talk about the 2012 season, because everyone gets lost in the 7 different winners at the start. Vettel's comeback after Alonso's kind of consistent performance throughout the season, and that title fight between them. But McLaren really had a great car and really should have been in a title fight at least to the last race.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they it's it just can't. It sort of reminds me of Ferrari's 2019 season. There are definitely a lot of similarities. Some people argue that definitely in the second half of the season they definitely had quite a good car, but obviously hampered by all of the endless strategy, pit stop, driver errors that happened. Sort of similar to McLaren, but yeah, in terms of raw pace, certainly at the first season they should have been winning almost all of the races, but obviously they couldn't capitalize on it, despite the best efforts of Hamilton, who was pretty consistent throughout the season, other than his bad luck, which a lot of the times was not self-inflicted. But then, if you look at the other end of the garage, Jenson Button, other than his first win of the season, he wasn't overly impressive, to be honest. It was a bit of a disappointing season, especially considering he was so good in 2011.
Yeah, Jenson Button really suffered this season. I remember watching him look back and talk about it, and it was just it was an issue with the tyres. He just, for whatever reason, him and that 2012 McLaren just didn't go together, even though obviously it started off perfectly, with claiming victory in Australia, and obviously he claimed that other victory as well. Where is it? Belgium, obviously he claimed victory leading from the front in that race. But yeah, he never kind of quite fell into place, but he was a sufferer of it was the qualifying as well. He was just terrible, especially that first half of the season, in terms of getting any sort of pace in the qualifying. Where you go in comparison for Lewis, he finished 3rd in the first 3 races. Obviously got his first victory in Canada, scored 4 victories that season amongst the kind of 5 retirements, and countless kind of issues that hindered him throughout that season. With everything that McLaren had going in their favour, and I think Eddie Jordan said it about the time, McLaren really were the ones who let this championship slip, because Ferrari and Red Bull kind of almost capitalised on McLaren's poor season.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and to be honest, it wasn't really much of the driver's fault. I mean, Hamilton, I think he pretty much did all that he could, and it was just McLaren that they provided the car for most of the season that under him that they needed to win, but just everything else was just completely out of place. Like, especially they screwed up the strategy for Hamilton in quite a lot of races, and then obviously we had the botched pit stops, and then that just, I guess, convinced him like this, I can't go on like this anymore. I think I need to make a change in my career. I guess it was that season that really made him make that decision. So I mean, in the long term, you could argue that it was a good thing for Hamilton, because we know that, he's done on to do some pretty good things ever since leaving McLaren. But yeah, 2012 was, a really unlucky year for Hamilton, and just a off year for McLaren in general, not with the car, but, all the other aspects of the team other than the car they need to win.
Certainly, just, that decision in 2012, it really was a career-defining one. It would have been interesting if Hamilton had stayed at McLaren, and had they gone on their kind of continued downward trajectory. What would we be talking about Lewis Hamilton in 2020? Would we still be talking about one of the all-time greats, or would we be talking about a 3-time world champion if he'd won 2012 and it hadn't quite worked out after that, and talking about others who might have? Would it be Nico Rosberg, who had claimed all titles at Mercedes in this time? It certainly would be very interesting to find out what might have happened. And this was also I think the relationship with McLaren really did sour, because I think it was around Singapore, was it, that he shared some telemetry on Twitter, was it, from McLaren, which obviously, is not a great thing for one of your drivers to be doing.
Yeah, also talking about how they gave Jensen a better front wing or something, and how he was losing a lot of time on the straights. Yeah, so it just showed that the relationship just got really fractured with him, and I guess Martin Whitmarsh also, who was an important person at McLaren.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's a time we forget. We often forget. Lewis is almost, we think he's this flawless character, flawless champion, and goes from there. But those times in McLaren after his World Championship in 2008, they were some tough times, and he was going through some tough times personally as a guy, and I think it certainly showed his more human side at McLaren. It just really, it really didn't pan out, and I think he really needed the wing of Niki Lauda to be kind of taken under, and that massively helped him as well.
Oh yeah, that's something that definitely is really overlooked. Actually, yeah, I think Lauda was really a great mentor for Hamilton, and it helped develop him into the beast that he is today.
Absolutely, but we'll round off this episode by talking about what we can only talk about was one of the great title battles of the decade. Whatever you think of Sebastian Vettel, whatever you think of Fernando Alonso, whether you're a fan of Vettel, whether you're a fan of Alonso, whether you're not a fan of either of them, this was an immense battle in terms of it. And, it went from Alonso was Mr. Consistent. He only had the 2 retirements throughout the season in Belgium and Japan, and just was a consistent, relentless point scorer in this time. Vettel had the early season struggles and was the comeback kid in that second half of the season, where everything seemed to go together and performed when the pressure was needed. And, was the Red Bull a better car? Probably over the course of the season, yes. It would be. The Ferrari wasn't a great car, and Fernando Alonso there, but it certainly wasn't as bad as what he would maybe have us believe in some circumstances. But it was just a great ding-dong battle between the two, and for me 2012 was a guy, you had 2 drivers who were deserving to win that title. If Fernando wins, I don't think anyone would begrudge him. With Sebastian Vettel winning, I don't begrudge him. I think he was a very worthy and champion.
I wouldn't be complaining.
No, you certainly wouldn't, no. But yeah, it was just a great battle, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it just been, I guess, something that we really just, I guess we've had the battles with obviously the Mercedes drivers, but yeah, it's just we haven't really seen anything like that. And it's weird how the Vettel-Alonso rivalry, I think it was a lot more of a rivalry than the Vettel-Hamilton rivalry, which seems to get a lot more attention. But yeah, those 2 drivers, they just really went at it, and it was amazing. It really brought the best out of both of them. 2012, I'm not sure what you think of it, but I think 2012 was Alonso's best season. The fact that he could challenge for a championship in the 3rd best car, I mean that is really something that not many people can do. And Vettel, he also really had his moments. It showed that he's not always a guy that's always gonna make mistakes. He really can rise to the challenge, also, as we saw in Abu Dhabi and Brazil. And yeah, he just drove really well. So yeah, both legends of the sport really going at it, and yeah, it just resulted in one of if not the best season that we've ever had.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is, although 2005 and 6 were the ones who won the world titles, this is, Fernando Alonso's best season, and it's the season where there are 2 seasons that define Fernando Alonso's career for me. The 2007 one for McLaren, but I think he'd almost regained it by this time in the point at Ferrari, and his relationship with Ferrari was very good at this point. And the 2012 season, if he wins that title, I don't know what comes after that. I don't know if it sours as much as it does. I don't know if he would still go to McLaren. after that, it would be fascinating to know, because he was desperate for that kind of third world title. And if he beat Sebastian Vettel to it as well, where he kind of probably feels that he is better than Sebastian Vettel, it would have been kind of huge for him, I think, to get it this season. And unfortunately, he just came up short. And it wasn't that he was the worst driver. I think Vettel and Alonso were pretty much par in terms of their respective strengths this season. It's just that Vettel's high point in terms of getting those 4 wins in the Asia rounds, and obviously the kind of 2 non-point scoring rounds for Alonso in Belgium and Japan, they really kind of hurt his charge in the end. And Vettel made the most of his chances, where, like you said early on in this video, Vettel suffered a lot of reliability issues, especially in that first part of the season. He definitely didn't have it his own way. So both of them, it was an immense fight, drove fantastic seasons, but unfortunately only one of them can be champion, and that was Sebastian Vettel.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it just could have went either way. Interesting you bring up his 2007 season. I'm actually releasing a video about that tomorrow, pretty sure. But yeah, that's an interesting point you actually bring up about, whether he would have won or not have won in 2012. It's just so many hypotheticals. One could argue that if he had won in 2012, he could still be at Ferrari today. I mean, why would Alonso leave Ferrari if he had won, in 2012? 2014 would have been tough. I don't know if he would have stayed or not. But why would you go to McLaren and leave the, team that you've won a championship with? It definitely is something that would have changed it.
Yeah, I think he always found it's difficult to buy into a project, a bit like Lewis Hamilton at McLaren. If he had won at McLaren in 2012, would he have left them for Mercedes? I don't know whether he necessarily would have, or he might have eventually have left them, but I'm not sure he certainly would have been able in the position to capitalise on the Mercedes position that he currently is in today. Careers are often fine margins. I mean, the other example, like we said earlier in this video, is Nico Hülkenberg. Would he have been offered maybe a top seat? Maybe McLaren would have looked at Nico Hülkenberg if he'd managed to secure a race win in that position. But Sergio Perez got that position ahead of Paul di Resta as well. It's all little kind of funny decisions that kind of are interesting how they play out in the world of F1. But we've got the history, what we've got, and it's an immense season. Whatever way you look at it, it is just an absolutely incredible season. And the last title battle between 2 rival teams, which I always think are the slightly better titles, because it's always interesting to see 2 teams and the strengths and weaknesses of both cars. What do you think on that?
Yeah, exactly. So much better to see 2 different teams. We haven't really seen that. Yeah, that's like the last time we really saw a good battle between the 2 teams. I guess, unless you count the battle between Ferrari and Mercedes, but that's only really half a season, to be honest. But yeah, I think F1. I think we really need another 2012 ASAP. Like we've been having, in these past few seasons, we've been having, some really good races. Obviously, Germany 2019, and that is a general one of the best of the decade, obviously. But yeah, we really haven't had, a good down to the wire championship battle between 2 different drivers and 2 different teams. So many different drivers in the hunt for the championship. So I mean, hopefully, the regs in 2022 will bring a bit more parity, a bit more more of a level playing field. It's not just biggest budget equals win. And we'll see more teams who don't have necessarily a $500 million budget able to challenge for occasional wins like we saw in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we desperately need, and it's what makes everyone remember 2012 so fondly. My gut instinct, just by looking at them as drivers, I almost see a 2005 situation happening. Well, obviously, Lewis Hamilton is the Michael Schumacher of the time in 2004, being dominant and going from there. But then I see there weren't obviously drop-off as performance like Ferrari did with the rule changes in 2005. But I can see, the Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen. I do think that will be the next rival in two different teams that we see. I just think they're the both best placed to do it. They have the teams behind them to do it, and yeah, I'm excited. I hope it's, well, when racing gets going, maybe it's even this season, but 2021, I'm sure. I'm hoping that's the title battle that we get.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But Amadi, it's been brilliant, kind of reliving what a great season 2012 is for you, and I'm excited for that kind of 2007 video coming out on your channel. But thank you so much for kind of coming on this look back journey with me.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to come on. Really enjoyed chatting about this, absolutely amazing season.
Yeah, it was really great. And guys, if you haven't come across Kids Love F1 already, I'm going to leave a link to his channel in the description down below. Really great content. Obviously, you can tell just by listening to him today, he's just such a knowledgeable F1 fan, and I always love his videos when they come out. So please go and drop him some support and drop him a subscribe on that front. And same with us. If you're new around here and you haven't done so already, please drop us a subscribe. Helps us out on the channel. But that's it for today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. So for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.